Thank you, and I really appreciate the community bringing me here. And I was thinking about how to start, and I read the flyer they made for the inviting you here, and I know you probably read the flyer, and you thought there's this guy Joe Newman, and he's coming to talk about how to get our children to behave, and except that's not entirely true. Because the problem is, I like behavior problem children. I mean, I actively prefer them. It's like I was one, and so I relate to them more than polite children. And it's why I do my work. And so, and I'm gonna let my daughter catch up. You need a second, Joan? It's okay. This is my daughter. This is my daughter, Joan, and she's after, because I'm going to talk until about for 50 minutes. Actually, I should write down the time here. And then we're going to take an intermission. Perfect. And after the intermission, we're going to do a Q&A, and Joan's going to join me up here because she's the second best person at what I do. And she's the only person in this room, I think, who's experienced both sides of it, So, and Joan's the one who suggested this slide, and the first thing I said when she showed me the slide is I said, no, that's sort of my first response. But then I thought about it, and I thought, I love this slide, actually. I love the idea, and I think it actually says more. There's a lot in it, right? There's an interesting Bible joke there, I guess. But there's also a statement of truth about original virtue, because I think children explore the world through conflict, through disobedience. For a lot of children, their first word is no. Okay? That has a purpose. It's not random. Okay? And I think that behavior in general and this disobedience is, and the behavior in general is, these are symptoms. These are questions. And it's a challenge. It's our challenge. What are they telling us? What are they trying to communicate? Okay? And when we figure that out, a lot of things are going to happen. A lot of things that we haven't seen before. And I think, so I'm going to start by just saying, what do parents want? Do you want kids who are kind or successful? What does successful look like to you? Happy, fulfilled, maybe resilient, maybe responsible, maybe tolerant, and mentally healthy. And I say mentally healthy because it's not a good time for that right now, right? This is, I'm not going to go very deep into this because I think you hear enough of it. But, anxiety and depression, sense of loneliness, inability to have relationships, these are all of a kind. And I think, it's not an easy time to be a parent, and I don't think it's an easy time to be a kid. But all of these things are based on, diagnoses, and from my perspective, a framework that looks at children as islands. It's like things go wrong, and it's happening inside this isolated creature, and I don't think they're isolated at all, and I don't think their psychology is isolated. I think their psychology is a product of something much bigger. Okay, and so I'm not shooting for, let's just get rid of disorders. It was kind of the work that I initially went to, but not for the reasons that are typical. What I'm shooting for is vigorous mental health. I think that's the question, because and vigorous mental health is something entirely different. It's not simply the absence of disorder, right? Vigorous mental health means you have an ability to live a meaningful life, to meet the challenges in the world they're going to inherit. Okay? It means to bring forth a whole person, that has a whole experience in many different ways. And I think it's why you go to Waldorf. Because and one thing I love about going to a Waldorf school, and today, at Sebastopol Independent, it was just a joyful day to see how many different levels children are engaged in. Okay, and I like working with Waldorf teachers because they're using a much bigger lens to look at what a child is and what a child can become than is typically used. It's not simply a set of rational ideas to be instilled. It's not all a cognitive thing. There's a whole heart and mind and spirit inside a child. And that relationship, I think, develops this kind of vigorous mental health. So I am going to talk about behavior, and I am going to talk about how to address behavior. But I'm going to talk about behavior and how to address behavior because I think where that happens, where that behavior is, and how you deal with it is the most powerful place to build mental health or to undermine it. Okay? To prepare them for what's going to happen in the world. And I think this is a whole frontier that we haven't explored. We tend to think in any given time that our psychology today, our understanding of the human mind is at some kind of pinnacle. We're smarter than we ever were. I don't think it's the case. I think there's a lot of space to go. Okay, so I'm going to share what that space that I found. Okay, and what I've did. So I'm going to tell you about the agenda for tonight. So I'm really going to just try and do 4 things. I'm going to tell you a little of my story because I think it informs the work. And then I'm going to talk about what I saw that motivates behavior, what I learned, okay, and what causes the behavior and what works to deal with that behavior. And then I'm going to give you just some simple tools, and I mean 2, right? Honestly, I remember going to Waldorf school the first time, and first Waldorf school I went to was Highland Hall, and this is like 10 years ago, and they gave me this is the behavior plan we're working with now, and I read through it and I thought about it, and eventually I put together a flow chart to try and understand it, and I realized, there were 63 different things that you had to consider doing before you responded in any given moment. And I said to the teachers, is anyone doing this? Because I'm not that smart. I can't do that. So I'm going to teach you one thing about that moment, right? How to handle that in a predictable way, that the better you get at it, the better the relationship becomes and the more reciprocity you get. So, and then lastly, why these tools create vigorous mental health. All right. So that guy looks familiar. It's me just a few years ago. So, in brief, I was the kid you didn't want in your class. My mom tells about me locking her out of the apartment until the fire department came because I thought it was funny when I was 3.5. Or, that when you go to the playground, other mothers would see us, gather their kids and leave. I went to school. It was not a good experience, even with the teacher that loved me, because I could feel this deep, like that I was making her crazy. I could see it, and that was really hard. The teachers that didn't love me were actually easier because I didn't have that conflict. And in 1970, they diagnosed me hyperactive. Later, that would be called ADHD. They studied me at the National Institutes of Health and at Johns Hopkins. A lot of the pioneers in the field were my doctors. I enjoyed it, as a kid. They're putting wires to your head. You're talking to grad students. They're showing you psychedelic movies. It was, it wasn't bad. That was the highlight of the ADD. I spent most of my years until I was 14 on Ritalin, and but still feeling like, this is what I heard all day, every day. I just heard what I was doing wrong. That's who I was. I was the culmination of this. There's a 98% of the kind of things that came out of the mouths of adults to me, right? And the Ritalin felt like a way to hide behind enemy lines. You couldn't talk about it. I made it through high school. I went to college, dropped out after 7 weeks, shaved my head in a mohawk, went surfing for a year. Next 10 years, I did 35 different jobs. And then at some point, I'd always, at that point, been a very hard partier. And one morning I woke up and I was afraid for my life. And I thought, you can't do this. You just can't do this anymore. You need some tether to the world. You need some purpose. You need something to keep you, because otherwise you're not gonna survive this. And I chant, I'm a Buddhist, so I chanted 5 hours a day for 5 days. And I just sort of screamed, like, I need a purpose. I need some meaning. And on the 5th day, things started to coalesce in my mind like a storm. And it came to me, you're not broken. You've learned you're not broken. You always believed you were broken. You always believed your character, all the times you disappoint people, all the times you don't do what you say, all the things where the people tell you you're smart, but if you only tried, okay? That piles up, and my basic frame was I was broken. And I said, but I'm not broken. And then I thought, there's millions, right now, millions of children getting the same message. That's it. I need to find them. I need to teach them something different. They're not broken. Okay? And literally, I walked into a school without a degree down the street. It's not a nice neighborhood. It might have something to do with it, because I walked in and without a degree or a reference or background check, I said, I just want to work with your kids that are driving the teacher crazy. And they said, come on in. and we're going to give him to Trayvon, pointed to me, to the secretary, and off I was with second grader Trayvon. And that led to me just working from school to school to school, always seeking out like the camp where they'd sent you had to make not just your teacher cry, but like an administrator and the school council. And once they're all in tears, you'd fly from California, you'd go to Pennsylvania, you'd stay at this camp. And so there was the 290 All-Stars. And I loved it. It was great. It was great work. And then I worked from school to school and gradually developed a method, an approach. And a lot of it was purely intuitive. And I will say, working with those kids was like working with myself. I didn't see them as broken. I didn't see them. Those things, their anger, that felt healthy. I knew why they were angry. I'm like, there's a reason you're angry. I know. It's not like you're just randomly angry and that's a bad thing. And so I did certain things. I knew what they needed. And one of them was simply, they needed to come up against somebody like them. They needed to come up with who was not going to disappear, who they couldn't overcome, who wasn't going to just keep moving out of the way or changing the circumstance because they couldn't handle it. They needed something. They needed that contact. They needed to know, that there's someone like them, just as determined, right? But they also, they weren't going to do it with any judgment at all. Okay. And so you really had to make sure that you were pulling the judgment out of each interaction, each conflict. And you had to give them autonomy, a sense that they had power and they were in charge of things. Okay? And then detach and allow them to shift gradually to you, to come into contact with you, and then in this way change their relationship with that boundary and slowly adapt. And I was really effective, and I was effective early. It was only 6 months between the time I walked into that school and when I was a crisis intervention specialist. at the camp, which it's a long story, but then it went school to school, and eventually, I was 28 when I had the realization I wanted to work with kids, and wasn't until 40 that I got my college degree, and then went on to get a master's, and but I learned in all of these interactions a couple key things about what was happening with children, and the first one is that conflict asks a question. Okay, when children are pushing boundaries, there's a deeper question at work. Because children don't come into the world with a sense of other people, a balanced sense of this yet. They come into the world really still in the womb, psychologically. They're one thing with the mother. Okay? Gradually, they start to understand we're separate. And then they're asking questions. How does this work? Are you like me? Okay? And so they have to gradually have experiences, physical experiences, real feelings to bring them through that. So all of their actions, all of those behaviors, and I want to just keep repeating this. Joan was like, keep repeating this sentence. Conflict asks a question. Because for a lot of the parents I work with, once they understand that, their responses become much more straightforward, okay, and easy, and they get better results. It's a way a child pushes themselves against you to feel who you are. It's learning, all right? Now, the metaphor I use in the book is called meet the hand. Okay, and this describes the process of development where children are bringing up conflict, engaging in conflict. Think about the terrible twos. It's called the terrible twos. Maybe they're not all saying the terrible twos anymore, but it's terrible, and it's terrible because it's confusing. Because the nature of conflict doesn't seem to make a rational sense. Because you have tantrums about all kinds of things. Okay? You want the Red Bull every day, got to have the Red Bull. One day they sit down, they have the Red Bull, and they're like, where's the blue bowl? I want the blue bowl. But you just put that in the dishwasher. And you've got a huge tantrum. It's not about the blue bowl. Okay? It's about who are you? What happens when I push up? So the question is a hand reaching up, and the hand reaches up and says, I'm here, I have power. Are you here? Do you have power? Who are you? Okay? And I would say the old school response, and for most of human history, a lot of that was settled with some fear. Okay? Maybe it was also just a matter of necessity, of moving through a day. There wasn't a time to get out of the way of that. It was just, no, I have power, you don't have power. I'm here, you're not here. That was the answer. Okay? Parent is made a God, child is negated. Okay? But I think we switched, and because we were in response to that. And we're going, I don't want to raise my children to have those same issues, that I do from having that negating experience. However it happened, okay? However you weren't recognized. And so we try to do something different. And the first thing is we have a conversation. And we talk about it. Okay? And we talk about it. But what I'm going to go into is that children are trying to understand this and need an experience. And so the words don't yet mean anything. They're drawing the meaning of the words from what's actually happening. So that hand coming up and says, I have power, they go and take a cookie and you say, I told you no more cookies. And they cry, but I really want one. Please, just this once. And then, okay, you can have the cookie, but I want you to talk about it next time and tell me what you want and don't just do it without me. Okay, fine. Well, that interaction, the hand came up, it says, I'm here, I have power. And the answer was, yes, you're here, you do have power. I'm not here, I don't have power. And if these kind of various accommodations keep happening, you're avoiding the experience they need to learn about others, to settle something inside, settle this question. And it leads to anxiety. And it leads to a feeling of abandonment and need to act out more and more and more. Okay? So that moment, what I'm trying to do, the whole thing I'm helping them to do, and the simple tool I'm going to show you is how to meet the hand, okay? That how do you recognize the child and hold yourself firm? How do you take away the shame, give autonomy, okay? Don't get punitive, and have an experience where they're like, oh, they're just as strong with me. So that they come into this full recognition and they settle that question. I'm in a world with other people with feelings and experiences, other people with needs, who also have a will, like me, okay? All right. So the first thing to understand about that process, and I think I've insinuated it already, but is that children are scientists, okay? So there's a great TED Talk by Alison Gopnik called How Babies Think. She's a developmental psychologist in Berkeley, and she studies children who are 18 months to like 5 years old, and she means this quite literally. Conditional probability. They're building models based on conditional probability to figure out how the world works, and they've actually done studies now where they're giving problems to 4-year-olds that require this Bayesian logic, which means observe the phenomena, create a theory, test the theory, develop another theory, test that theory, look at 4 different theories, and then figure out intuitively which one is the best, follow that one, continue, repeat. And they're better than AI. The 4-year-olds are better at AI than solving these problems, okay? They're better than graduate students at solving these problems. They have an intuitive ability to understand and read events that happen, okay? Because the data, what this looks like, let's just talk about what this looks like in reality. So here's a simple test, right? What happens when I throw my toys? And nothing happens might be, don't throw your toys. I told you. Well, if you throw your toys, they're going to break. I've told you not to throw your toys. Getting down on your knees and saying, hey, I really don't want you to throw your toys. I'll let it can go on, but all those things are not frustrating. They might even be happy experiences, And the truth is that this model is more complex. It's like, if maybe it's nothing happens, unless you hear the tone of my mom's voice change, go up an octave, and then I've got 2 more trials. Okay. It's like so they're making models not just about what happens, but what happens with you, and then what happens with you because it's different. Okay, and I go to one classroom and I behave this way because I've conducted my trials, and I go to this class and I act an entirely different way because I have an entirely different set of trials, and it's all conditional, and I can sense when you're in a bad mood and the trial things are changing. So all this is going on. Children are making maps, but they're doing it on action, okay, and these maps are sort of key to the rest of it. If you can set patterns and do things in simple ways to make simple maps, you're going to find that your children, do something very different. Kids, they want to know what's going to happen. They want to know if your words match reality. Like I'll say, have parents are like, what's the problem with your children? He doesn't understand no means no. Then you watch it and you're like, well, no doesn't mean no. Honestly, it's like, I think maybe we're confused here, but the meaning of no in this house is 3 more times or 5 more times. And, no if you ask this one, but if you switch over to this one, they'll usually say yes. It's like, this is what no means. But information, so this attempt to use information, convincing, talking, explaining, all of these things, it doesn't make a good map. It doesn't give data points that children understand. Okay? Scientists don't want your theory about, what makes steam. They want an experiment. They need to see what happens. They're going to run an experiment. Okay, and so information and giving lots of information actually creates problems. And this is, for me, that information that I was getting, it did more than just pile up sort of a negative image of who I was. Okay, about all the things I was doing wrong. It built in defiance. It made me defiant. It made me defensive. And this is me as a teenager, right? And information overload has a lot of effects, okay? The first one is the negative self-image. But the second one is reactive thinking, okay? If you're going to tell them every day to do things they could figure out themselves, if as a teacher, you're going to manage all of their behavior about things on which they can manage themselves, they wait for things to happen because you're going to manage them, okay? You're taking away this initiative. And I think taking away that initiative is part of the reason you get defiance, okay? So the best example I can think of, and I'll talk about passive tantrums in a minute, is when I was 14, one of my jobs was to take out the trash. And it wasn't a big job. It was, I had to move 2 cans 50 feet from the front porch to the edge of the road. And for this, I got, $10 or something. And, but every Monday, because the trash had to go out Tuesday morning by 6:30. And then again, it had to be Friday morning by 6:30. But every Monday, I remember when I'd hear my dad's car come up the driveway. And I would think, if he doesn't tell me to take out the trash, I'm going to take it out when he comes in. And within a minute, he would say, hey, you didn't forget today's trash day, did you? And I go, no, I didn't forget. About 45 minutes later, he'd say, you got a little time before dinner. Be a good opportunity to take out the trash. I think I'm going to wait. And then after dinner, he'd say, look, the show's not starting yet. You probably, if you rush, you could take out the trash. And I said, no, maybe after dinner. And I remember watching the sitcom and seeing they're setting up for the act break. So the act break, my wife's a TV writer, so so the act break is like this big joke they have to set up for, and they do before the long commercial, when there were commercials, right? So, but I could say, they're going to that long commercial. And I would think, if he doesn't tell me to take out the trash, I'm going to get out there because I don't. And he would say, this is the long commercial. Why don't you take out the trash, right? And there were 2 dialogues going on there. One was a dad with a super ADD kid thinking, if I hold this structure long enough, repeat it often enough, maybe he'll do it. Maybe it'll stick. But what I was hearing was, hey, stupid, why don't you take out the trash? Hey, stupid, I know I've told you already. I know I told you 4 times every night the night before. Why don't you take out the trash? And to do that would be responding to, hey, stupid. It's like I'm answering to it. And my dignity wouldn't allow me to do it. And what I want you to think about is that if you look at your day and you ask yourself, how many times am I telling my kids something that if I froze that moment and I said, Brian, I'll give you the Star Wars Lego set if you can tell me what I'm about to say. Could they tell you? Because if they could, telling them steals the autonomy of them figuring it out. It lowers the expectation, and they'll respond to that. Okay? So, and for me, it didn't end there, but that's a good one actually, Joan. Because for me, I had that relationship with boundaries until I was at least 33. I think I still have a big part of it now. Because it was a part of my identity. Who I was, having dignity, meant saying no and crossing boundaries, even when it wasn't in my own interest. That's the way I feel dignity, okay? And I see boys in kindergarten, girls in 4th grade doing the same thing, who didn't come in defiant with some natural, but through a process of assuming they didn't understand, they became defiant in reaction to the relationship. Okay. All right. Good. Give me a moment here. All right. So how do you get out of this? Right? People hear that story about my dad and they're like, what would you have suggested he did? Right? How do you solve the problem? And I think it's to set a cause and effect relationship and change the game a little bit. But everything that we're doing, everything I'm doing is trying to create a cause and effect environment that has a different relationship with conflict. Because in the world, you'll succeed if you do well in a cause and effect environment and you have a good relationship with that. You feel good about being able to take on those challenges and how it handles. It doesn't define you. Okay. So by a cause and effect environment is, and let's want to go to the next one. Yeah. So as opposed to lectures and explanations. And the way to do this is what I've been teaching schools. And this is the sort of first tool. It's called the break protocol. Okay. So a break protocol is a series of things that you can do in a predictable way over and over that children will adapt to, that frames it in frames it in a way that gives them a sense of autonomy, lets them feel respect. And a break itself is really just a moment of frustration. It's just, I need you to stop, move, sit for a minute, quietly. Okay? But it's also just the meeting the hand happening without the judgment. And that has to do with the delivery and how you do it and what you do it with. Okay? It makes clear maps, and I'll show you that in a minute. But it also helps them maintain their autonomy and dignity. And a lot of that has, because it's, you have to talk about it and you have to use it like a cause and effect that you're just administering, and not a punishment, not a judgment, not a, hey, I told you, stop interrupting me, take a break, right? Not how you do a break, okay? So it starts with making a map. And I'm going to give you an example of one of those, and I'm just going to talk about it. This is a simple map. You want to, all right. So this is a home map, right? I would say if you were at the school, if your kids were at school, this would be changed to maybe a lateral send, okay? And so what it means is that there's a small behavior, any kind of behavior, doesn't happen. You just need an adjustment. It doesn't have to be bad. People often ask, how do you know when it deserves a break? It's like, well, how do you know when you deserve a stoplight? Stoplights organize a community. It's not because you're a bad driver. It's not always a speeding ticket. It's just to keep a boundary there that they learn to adapt to. Okay? So let's say, someone has just got their hands all over somebody else. There's no intention to it, but it's disturbing the learning, and you say, Lisa, I need you to take a break for a minute. He says, why? What did I do? I can't talk about it until afterwards. You're not in trouble. It's no big deal. But if you don't take the break, then it becomes a bigger break. Right? I'll let you decide. You wait, you count. So now it's the bigger break. Unless they go to sit. Okay? They go to sit and it's like, and they're crying or they're upset. Maybe it's a young child. I'll wait till you're finished. This is actually, this map, I will tell you, is for a 12-year-old. It might be for an 8-year-old. I brought up one for the home. And actually, this is the map that the story I think about in terms of this map and how it was used is with a family that I went to see with a 12-year-old who just was very dysregulated, constantly torturing his sister who was 10, just not doing what's asked, very belligerent and sort of disrespectful. Mom was doing most of the parenting, like the lion's share of the parenting. And she did a lot of talking. She was very kind. She was very sweet. Dad would come home, was very critical of Mom, and, once or twice a week, he'd bring the hammer down. That's it. No phone for the week. He got 1 hour of phone time which he cherished at like 5 to 6 before dinner. That's what he wanted. And I said, let's start and use this basic protocol. He's smacking his sister. You say, just take a break for a minute. Let's just interrupt that behavior and get some reciprocity. But when he doesn't do it, just say, look, I can't make you do it. You're 12. I'm not going to force you, but it's going to get longer. And if you don't do that, you're gradually going to lose phone time. 2 minutes for every one that you wait until you sit for 5 minutes. Gradually. I'm not taking it all away. And I explained this to the mom and dad says to me, I like it. I like the plan. It's very solid. He says, but I got a little twist. I think it's going to make it a little better. He says, how about when he doesn't do the 5-minute break, we take 10 minutes off right away. That way it'll really sting. Get him to take the break. And I said, I thought about it for a minute, and I said, I don't want him to take the break. What do you mean? I don't want him to take a break. Because when he doesn't take the break, that's where your relationship goes to crap. That's where it all breaks down. In that moment, because you bring the hammer down, and you want to show him who's boss. No autonomy, no dignity. Okay? He needs to cross that boundary so you can do something different. Okay? I want that to happen because that's a space where you can say instead, look, you're 12. I'm going to respect your decision. Your mom and I are following a pattern. So if you're good with trading your phone time, don't take the break. If in 5 minutes you decide you want the other 15 minutes, come back and tell me and do the break. I'm good with either one. And walk away. Okay? Let's meet the hand. That's a structure of, there's respect, but I've got my boundaries. I do have my needs. Okay? And it motivates what you really just want, which is you'd like people to stop, your kids to stop and do that. And when you do that on a regular basis, it builds this tension of awareness of the other person being real. Okay? That all of those times where you kind of have become invisible because they don't respect those boundaries because nothing happened, in a gradual way, bring them into recognition with you. Okay? It creates, and it settles. Okay? And it changes how you feel about each other. And, so being able to maintain this relationship in the process, we're back one. Oh, no. That's right. I'm going to jump. No, let's go to the next one. All right. So some of the tools, these are just some of the simple tools that I did in the beginning. What it sounds like when I'm given a break, when I'm in a classroom, is I'm doing the opposite of moralizing. I'm trying to take the energy out of it. I'm trying to say actively it's not bad. Sometimes it is bad. Sometimes it's something like, oh, but my goal is just reciprocity in that moment. We can do reflection afterwards. We can have a good conversation, but I want self-regulation. I want a data point that he respects, okay? And so when I first did this, I was at the summer camp with, 10 kids in a classroom. They're all like uber emotional and very unregulated and very defiant and sensitive, And I'd say, Ethan, I need to take a break for a minute. And he'd go, no, I'm sorry. Or he'd say, but he started it. Look what he's doing. And I'd say, look, it's not a big deal. It's a minute. And he'd go, but what did I do? He didn't say you did anything wrong. He said, but tell me what I did. I said, I can't talk about it till after. But, if you don't take it in 5 seconds, it gets longer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And honestly, in the first 3 days, we had to drag a lot of kids out of the room. That's the reality. But it was that kind of camp, to be honest. It was like they were there. That was not unusual in their lives. But by the end of the first week, kids took breaks. Because they were free of the burden of hearing what they did wrong. Your relationship had already shifted. You'd already said, look, I can't make you. This is just what happens. And they were changing to it. The other things I said were about autonomy. Okay? It's your decision. It's not mine. Okay, this is a cause and effect. That child's the protagonist. They make decisions. Frame it as them being the protagonist. Okay? If you need to do that, you should. If you know, I've had kids who scream and cry, I'm never going to be quiet. Like, then kick and scream. But this doesn't end until you sit for a minute or for 5. I don't know. Okay? I can't control you. The really healthy thing to say to a child, you can't control. Right? I'm okay with either decision, but when this happens, this other thing happens. You're driving. Okay? They're trying to assert autonomy. Recognize it. Okay. And by the way, my favorite thing about that summer camp. Let's go there. Joan's keeping me on point here. Okay. So this is the 2 pieces of that. You know, this is a slightly different. There's a couple different maps that you make for different ages, but this is basically the structure, the relationship, cause and effect structure. Speak to them with respect. Remove the judgment, high expectation. Frame them as a protagonist. Right. So at that summer camp, my favorite day that first year was 3.5 weeks in. You know, half those 290 kids went home and they were replaced by, you know, whatever that is, 145 new kids, right? So I would get a class and half of them would be kids that had been doing the program for 3 weeks or knew what I did, and half had never heard it before. And I'd say, Diana, I need you to take a break. And Diana would start going, but I didn't do anything. I'm not going to do it. And, you know, you can't make me. And the kids turned to her and they went, hey, you're not in trouble. If you take the break, you let you come right back. It's no big deal. You know, they just took all that stuff in and they had moved into this new framing of that. And all of a sudden, all kinds of things started getting done. Now, these were classes that needed 25 breaks in a 50-minute period. That's fine. But kids just got up. They stood in the door frame. They watched the clock. They went like this. I'm like, yeah, come back. And it was enough to run a class, to manage it. And things were getting, and when they had Parents' Day, kids were dragging their parents for the first time to education because they'd had a good experience. Kids that hadn't had a good experience. Okay. So, all right. So when you use it, it's like a video game. And maybe this is the wrong slide for a Waldorf. But video games, there's a reason. You have to think about how children play them and why they're compelling. And and hold on, I want to find my notes. Let me get back to it. Right. And that's because if you look at, like, I don't know anyone who's ever read the manual of how the video game works, right? No kid sits there. They play, they fail, they die, they go back and they do it again. They play, they fail, they die, they do it again. They play, they fail, they die, they do it again. And each time they're unraveling like a puzzle, a map. They're figuring their way through a city. This is what happens. This is the trick. This is what happens. Do it again. And when I talk to teachers about how to do this, or parents, it's like, they're like, there's a lot of talk like, you have to always stay neutral. You have to always be peaceful. You have to always, and sometimes that's super hard. You know, when one of your kids has smacked his 2-year-old brother and the other one's wailing, and you're supposed to be really nice and channel the Buddha. It's like, but the step beyond that, and I think what is that breaks are something you can do playfully. Okay? Because they understand games. And it's like, so giving a break in a classroom or at home can be, oh, take a break for a minute. What did I do? It's like, it's almost like, thanks for playing. But in 5 seconds, the next thing happens. Let's see, you know, and you just, because it's a way to just make your needs known. And 1 minute isn't a big deal. 1 minute's just a moment of pause. It's a moment without stimulation. That's something we want them to be able to endure, even when they're mad, even when they're upset. That's a great tool. So if we can pull out the charge and kids get used to regulating themselves, even when they're upset, even when it's unjust, that's a powerful thing. Okay? All right. Let's make it stay. Okay. So so I think that mental health is built from 100,000 very mundane moments. Okay? That resilience, like awareness of other people, you know, it's not some realization you come to. It's not like, do you have empathy or you don't? Do you have composure? Do you don't? Do you know, or you have self-discipline or you don't? It's something that happens because it becomes an experience of other people and how that relationship is built. So these little breaks are one example, and we might go back at some point. We might do it later. Let's actually do the mapping one. Did we miss mapping? There we go, mapping. One more tool, because we're making good time here. I'm going to wrap up in the next couple minutes, but I want to talk about mapping. This is a simple tool it oddly works really well with teens and toddlers. Because I designed it for toddlers, but then a lot of adults said, "Oh, that works really well with my teen." And basically, it's another way of framing things, and because you're going to have two different kinds of behaviors you have to deal with, so I'm giving you one tool for each behavior. That's it. The first one is breaks, as a way of stopping behaviors you don't want to see continue, and to create new patterns of self-regulation. But the other one is getting kids to do things that they don't want to do. So there's stopping things, and there's getting things going that you need. And for that, mapping is a good tool. And it started out with it was a 2-year-old. I was actually at the house for the 5-year-old, but the 2-year-old was sitting in his mother's lap, and he had a big chunk of bread. It was like, you know, La Brea Bakery bread. It was crusty, and mom had white carpets, and he wanted to go run and play with his brothers with the bread. And she's like, you can't run you got to finish the bread. I don't want that all over the house. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to a 2-year-old. So he's just, no. And she's like, no. And, you know, leave the bread. No, I want the bread. You know, then you can't go play, but I want to play. And it's just and she looks at me, she's like, any suggestions? And so I reached my hand out and I held his hand that had the bread in it. And I said, you want the bread? I said, do you want the bread? I repeated this. Eventually he says, I want the bread. And if you want the bread, you have to stay in your mom's lap. He's like, I want to get down. I'm like, oh, do you want to go play? Yes. If you want to go play, you have to leave the bread. And I repeated that for about 60 seconds, and until it clearly tracked. And he was like, bread, stay, you know, no bread, play. And he looked at me, looked at his mom, he took the chunk of bread, he stuffed the whole thing in his mouth. And once he got his mouth around it, mostly, he went, and she's like, all right, you're out of here. And so he went in. But that's cooperation, right? There's some reciprocity. And this is, you know, if you want to get results, it's like I have a family I'm working with a 15-year-old, and their daughter just never does anything they need her to do. And it's like, well, where are some places where she clearly wants something from you? Well, we give her rides here, we do this. I'm like, let's just pick those moments an hour before to say, hey, if you want me to take you to your friend's house, I'm going to need the room picked up. And then when the fight comes, it's like, look, if you don't want to pick up your clothes, don't pick up your clothes. But I want to go to such and such. Well, yeah, but that's going to require the room picked up. I can't control you. I'm just controlling what I can do. This isn't personal. I just don't want to do something until I get what I need. That's it. It's a trade. Okay? That kind of trading interaction often feels fine for a teenager. It doesn't feel like you need to do it because I need you to become responsible. I need you to learn how to clean your room. You know, how are you ever going to, you know, who's ever going to be your roommate if you leave your room like this, you haven't cleaned it for a month, you know. That's not an effective tool, you know, and instead, these kind of this before that are powerful, simple structures you can drop into your night, into your day, that when repeated, get cooperation. because it feels autonomous. It's respectful. You can have the different conversation. Do the thing you want, but this doesn't happen until that happens. Nothing personal. Okay? Now, so Joan, let's go to vigorous mental health. So I do want to talk about that. I think that mental health, that the things that we think about in terms of, compassion, emotional regulation, intimacy, feelings of belonging, ability to have a sense of purpose, all these things happen and are built through this process of coming up and how that conflict is handled. And I think we've been taught to avoid conflict, that if we have an interaction and we avoid conflict with our children, that was successful, however that happens. And I think you're missing the most important moment, which is that this is how humans learn about each other. You're missing it. You just, it's like if you think you're going to raise respectful children without having conflict, it's like I'm going to become a great athlete and I'm never going to work out. It's not here, okay? It's here. Okay? There's a whole thing happening. And so one of the ways to understand that is that attention and effort are given in two directions. And when a child is born, that attention and effort is one direction, from you to the child. That's how it should be. Okay? You're not asking them to do chores, right? You're just giving everything they need. But between then and 18, that equation those buckets need to shift. If they're not developing, it's not because you didn't give enough attention and effort in the exact right way, it's because you didn't ask for it in the right way. They need to slowly, to their capacity, give you effort and attention. Consider your needs. That tension of things actually happening, bring that to fruition. Allow all those moments to build these psychological muscles that will enable them to go into this world, to deal with these things. This is mutual recognition, okay? I think the recognition of parent and children, went from being lopsided one way to being lopsided another, okay? And how they frame that inside. And you can think of this is the thing you're building, this awareness, how it's held. The other person across from them has feelings, has an experience, is real. They're like me, okay? I'm real. I have agency. I am an independent thinker, It's one of the things I want, that independent thought. I like the challenge, but I want reciprocity. I'm not going to be negated in this. Okay? So we need to get to mutual recognition. Okay? And I will say that mutual recognition, these are the qualities that you need for vigorous mental health. Okay? And I think that it goes way beyond simply developing these things with one other person and having this internal model that you and one other person are, equal, and so you can have an intimate relationship. You can see someone and respect their needs and succeed in that dynamic. But it goes bigger, right? Now, my daughter asked me when I put this up, why do you have pants and bath on there? Right? And I said, because I wrote this right after COVID. Right? So one of the problems with COVID was that kids didn't have to take a bath if they didn't need to take a bath. A lot of kids could go till, 6 p.m. without putting pants on, And school was one of these tensions. It's like, you actually have to be bathed and pants on before you get to school, because I got to get to school because I'm working, because I'm not home all day. And we had this big 2-year gap where all of these threads were cut. All of these normal, mundane things of considering the people in the world around you, the things that build actually a sense of belonging, that ward off depression, that will build a sense of purpose, having your own unique abilities expressed, appreciated in the way you contribute in the world, all the things that give you that meaning, these fundamental first steps were cut out Okay? And then we brought them back to school and said, oh, let's just proceed like things were normal. All right? Those kids struggle in school. And I see it in the classrooms. I'm like, yeah, this is the one, this group missed all that. Right? So, so I'll wrap up with this is one of my favorite essays, Self-Reliance, Emerson. And he says, it's easy in the world to live after the world's opinion. It's easy in solitude to live after our own. But the great man is he who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. And I think in this time, we need more than kids who aren't mentally ill or, or frail. We need robust thinkers, actors, morally courageous people who can make decisions and face the hardships they're going to face with joy and a sense of connectedness. And this is ultimately the goal of what I'm doing. And I appreciate your time. Thank you. So I think we're taking a 15-minute intermission. I think we'll have books out here and there's snacks, and then we'll do Q&A when we come back. And we'll let you know.
There's also a raffle. Right now there's 30 tickets, really good odds.